The great chamber of the Galactic Council was alive with noise. Towering banners of alien empires hung from every arch of the massive hall. The floor gleamed like polished obsidian, and the air was filled with voices of those who believed they ruled the stars. Thousands of alien delegates sat in curved rows around the center of the chamber. Their robes, their badges, their shining symbols all screamed power. In the center stood the speaker's pedestal, a raised circular platform from which the council addressed entire civilizations. They had summoned thousands before. No one had ever dared to refuse them, until now. For months, they had sent summons after summons to Earth. Every message had been loud, commanding, full of arrogance. Humanity must appear before the Council. Earth will comply. The Terran system is under jurisdiction of the Council. Every empire obeyed these summons. Every empire knelt. Every world came to explain themselves. But Earth had done something no one had ever done before. Said nothing. Not a single word. Not one acknowledgement. No ambassador. No ship. No signal. Silence. It was the kind of silence that made the Council restless. In the beginning, they treated it like a joke. Alien delegates had laughed, sipping their glowing drinks, shaking their heads at those primitive humans. Some had even joked that Earth probably didn't have the technology to receive the summons. Others said the humans were too busy fighting among themselves to even care. The Council's orders were repeated again and again, growing louder, more aggressive. But the silence remained. Weeks passed, months passed, and the silence began to feel less like ignorance and more like defiance. On the upper seats of the chamber, the Council speaker, a tall, insectoid alien with golden carapace plates, slammed his claw against the control panel. His voice boomed through the chamber. The Terrans mock us with their silence. No world in this galaxy ignores the summons of the Council. No one defies the will of the stars. And yet Earth, this backwater planet, this weak, chaotic species, dares to remain silent. His voice echoed like thunder. The chamber erupted with angry chatter. Some shouted for punishment. Some shouted for invasion. A few laughed cruelly. Not one of them spoke of caution. They believed the humans were beneath them. A blue-skinned ambassador from a nearby empire stood, folding his long fingers together. Speaker, humanity has no fleet capable of resisting the Council. Their ships are outdated. Their armies are scattered. If they refuse to come, then we should bring them here in chains. His words were met with nods and approving growls. Another delegate, a reptilian creature with eyes like glass, hissed with amusement. They think themselves special, but they are like the others. Fear will break them. It always does. Laughter rippled through the chamber, sharp and cold. But in a corner of the hall, a few old council members shifted uneasily. They remembered stories, whispers from history, of what happened the last time humanity was underestimated. They said nothing. They watched. On the other side of the galaxy, far away from the Grand Chamber, Earth floated quietly in the black sea of space. The Sol system looked peaceful from the outside. But hidden beneath that quiet surface, humanity was not sleeping. Inside the cold black of deep space, Terran command moved like a silent machine. A massive ring station orbiting the sun in the shadow of Mercury pulsed with life, its lights dim to keep its position hidden from most galactic scanners. Inside, rows of officers and analysts watched council transmissions in silence. Every summons had been intercepted, recorded, analyzed. The Council thought humanity wasn't listening. They were wrong. Humanity was listening to everything. The command center was built like a war bunker. No windows, no bright colors, just steel, light, and purpose. At the center of the room stood a single holographic table, projecting the image of the council chamber. Every gesture, every speech, every burst of laughter was monitored. Behind the table, Terran Supreme Commander Elias Ward stood with his hands behind his back. His eyes, gray and cold as winter, watched the holograms without blinking. He wasn't dressed in ceremonial robes. He wore the dark uniform of the Terran fleet, plain, efficient, unshakable. Another summons? one of the officers asked, glancing up from the console. Her voice was calm, not nervous. Everyone here knew what was coming. Ward didn't look at her. Yes, he said quietly. They're getting impatient. The officer smirked. Good. Let them shout into the void. Ward's lips twitched slightly. They will shout. They will laugh. And when they realize what silence meant, they will not laugh again. He turned to the main display. Play their speech. The alien speaker's image grew larger. His golden exoskeleton gleamed. His voice filled the Terran command room as he declared that the Council would not tolerate defiance. Ward listened to every word. He didn't look angry. He looked patient. He waited for the speech to end before finally speaking. They think silence means weakness. He stepped closer to the hologram. But silence means we're ready. Far away, in orbit around Mars, colossal structures floated in darkness. Shipyards the Council did not know existed. Thousands of engineers worked without rest. Massive shadows drifted under faint red light, shapes so large they could blot out stars. These weren't the old Terran ships the Council mocked decades ago. These were new, faster, deadlier. Entire fleets hidden away for the moment humanity needed them. Every ship was armed, fueled, and waiting for a single word to be launched into the stars. Back in the Council chamber, the speaker raised his voice again. Send the summons again. Triple the pressure. Humanity will kneel like everyone else. His words earned cheers. The chamber echoed with confidence. It was almost funny to watch how sure they were. They believed history would repeat itself. Every empire that stood before them had eventually bowed. Why would Earth be different? An ambassador from a warrior race slammed his armored fist on the table. And if they do not kneel, Speaker, we will make an example of them. One strike from our fleets and their cities will burn. The hall cheered again. Not a single delegate considered the possibility that humanity might not be cornered. Not a single one imagined that maybe, just maybe, the silence was the warning. In the dark of space, in Terran command, Ward's voice was low and steady as he spoke to his officers. They will come. They will demand. And then they will think they are ready to punish us. His eyes narrowed. And that will be the moment they realize who they called. Back on Earth, far below the orbiting stations, the cities moved like they always had. Children went to school. Factories built what they were told. Civilian news was calm. But underneath the normal surface, there was a pulse in the air, a quiet readiness. Humanity was not panicking about the Council. They weren't preparing defenses in desperation. They were preparing with precision. Military convoys moved through underground tunnels. Long-range railgun platforms were being aligned. And in hidden hangars under the ice of Antarctica, the largest warship humanity had ever built sat in silent darkness, its engines asleep but ready. On its side, a name was painted in white. HSS Retribution. The Council believed humanity was ignoring their calls because they were afraid. But the truth was far colder. Humanity was giving the Council all the time it needed to grow comfortable, to grow arrogant, to believe this war would be easy. They let the Council summon. They let the Council mock. Because when humanity answers, it does not whisper. It roars. A month later, the Council chamber gathered again. The speaker's voice filled the hall with fury. Once again, the humans have refused. They mock the Council. They mock our power. He raised his clawed hand toward the massive war map floating in the center of the chamber. The fleets are ready. If Earth does not kneel in the next cycle, we will burn their world to ash. The chamber erupted with cheers. Delegates chanted for war. They were drunk on their own power. But among the thousands of ships the Council prepared, none of them noticed that on the outer edges of the galaxy, human probes had already mapped every single formation they planned. The Terran fleet knew their numbers. They knew their locations. They even knew the routes their ships would take. The Council thought this was their move. It was already humanity's. In Terran command, Ward turned away from the display and walked toward the wide window of the observation deck. Beyond it, the black void of space stretched forever. He placed his hand on the cold glass. "Let them summon us again," he said softly. "They think we will bow. He looked at the stars and smiled, but it was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a hunter waiting for the prey to take one more step. In that moment, far away, the council sent their final summons. It was loud, public, arrogant. Every world heard it. Every species knew the council would strike soon. But the humans, as always, said nothing. The stars over Earth stayed dark and quiet. But in that silence, something massive moved. A whisper spread through the Terran fleet yards. Engines hummed. Shields powered up. Weapons locked into position. The silence was no longer a sign of fear. It was the sound of a storm building. A storm the galaxy wasn't ready for. In the council chamber, the speaker raised his voice one last time. Summon them, or crush them. His arrogance filled the air. The chamber roared its approval. But none of them understood that the moment they had been waiting for had already been decided. Not by them, but by the very silence they mocked. And in the cold void around Earth, where no council eyes could see, Terran Command whispered its own answer. We heard you. The silence stretched. It was the kind of silence that lives just before thunder. When it breaks, the galaxy will never be the same again. The council chamber burns with pride and mockery as the summons to Earth are ignored again. But this time the laughter is louder, crueler. They gather under the shining arches of their capital world like victors before the war has even begun. Alien ambassadors sit in wide circles, their glowing robes flowing, their expressions full of smug certainty. One after another, speakers rise to insult humanity. They call Earth a forgotten world. They call Terrans reckless, unorganized, barely worthy of being part of the galaxy. They joke about how long it will take to break them when the fleets arrive. The council speaker raises his golden hands, his voice booming through the chamber as the delegates chuckle and jeer. They are stubborn animals who think silence protects them. But silence is not strength. Silence is weakness. They will come crawling when they see our fleets above their world. The chamber erupts in applause. Alien dignitaries pound their fists on the tables, their claws and hands slamming on polished stone, their laughter echoing. Entire sectors are watching the council's broadcast live. Billions of alien citizens tuning in to see the humiliation of humanity. This is entertainment to them. The Great Council, the supreme power of the stars, mocking a single planet. A delegate with cold blue skin stands and flicks his long fingers. They are still young. They have no empire, no fleets worthy of notice. Why do we waste our time on such creatures? Another, with jagged armor-like scales across his body, leans forward and hisses. Because this is what happens when a world forgets who rules the stars. We must remind them. And so, the mockery continues. Council screens show old Terran ships, outdated, slow, weak compared to modern alien armadas. They display statistics, laugh about numbers, compare the Council's vast fleets to Earth's small defenses. It becomes a ritual. Every week, the Council meets to send another summons, and every week humanity remains silent. Every unanswered message fuels their arrogance more. Look at them, the speaker roars. Not even brave enough to send a single envoy. They are children pretending to stand tall among gods. But far away from this glowing theater of power, behind the black curtain of space, humanity listens to every word. In hidden Terran listening posts scattered throughout the outer rim, the alien speeches are captured, decoded, analyzed. On the cold decks of Terran Command, these transmissions are played without emotion. The humans do not shout back. They do not respond. They let the aliens grow drunk on their own pride. They let the galaxy believe in their weakness. Because arrogance is a weapon too, it makes enemies blind. And humanity knows how to use it. Deep beneath the Earth, in massive underground command facilities, the words of the Council echo through reinforced halls. Rows of officers, soldiers, analysts, and commanders sit behind glowing screens, listening to every insult. They do not flinch. This is not the first time humanity has been mocked. History has taught them that the loudest enemy falls the hardest. An older admiral leans over a console and mutters, "Let them laugh. They're laughing because they don't understand." A younger officer next to him nods. And when they finally understand, it will be too late. Above them, on the surface of the world, people live their daily lives unaware of the scale of what is coming. To them, the night skies are quiet. To Terran Command, the skies are waiting to be set on fire. Meanwhile, the Council continues its parade. Alien news networks replay their jokes about humans. Memes and broadcasts sweep through alien worlds. Earth the mute. Earth the weak. Earth the foolish. Billions across the galaxy repeat these words, convinced that the Terrans will fall in a single strike. The alien admirals speak openly about how they will split Earth into colonies. Merchant guilds discuss what resources they will take. Soldiers brag about how fast the war will end. And all the while, the humans say nothing. They let the enemy speak, and every word is recorded. In orbit around the moon, an old Terran station wakes up from its silent slumber. Its corridors, once empty, fill with personnel in black uniforms, carrying equipment and orders. Giant hangar doors open slowly, revealing warships hidden beneath layers of artificial rock. Their black hulls reflect no light. No alien sensors pick them up. What the galaxy believes to be a planet too weak to respond has been building quietly in the dark for decades. Below the surface of Mars, reactors thrum softly as massive cruisers begin their silent startup sequences. Fleets long prepared for this day stir like sleeping beasts. In the council chamber, the speaker slams his claw on the floor again, demanding action. Enough playing games. If they do not answer by the next cycle, we will send the Grand Armada. Let the stars themselves witness what happens to those who ignore us. His words echo through the hall as alien cameras broadcast every angle. The delegates cheer. The galaxy roars with approval. To them, the Terrans are already defeated. The speaker smiles a sharp, cruel smile. They will bow, he says. Everyone does. In Terran Command, no one is smiling. No one is angry either. There's only cold, focused silence. Admiral Ward stands over a massive holomap of Council space. The entire alien fleet structure, logistics routes, and command chains are mapped out in perfect detail. Years of intelligence work have given humanity everything they need to know. Ward's voice is quiet, but it cuts through the room like steel. They think they've seen our weakness, he says. But all they've seen is what we allowed them to see. Around him, officers continue working. No one claps. No one cheers. This is not a moment of pride. It's the calm before a storm. On massive shipyards orbiting Neptune, warships twice the size of anything the Council expects remain hidden under thermal masks, cold and invisible. Engineers move through dim light, whispering orders as reactors are fueled. Thousands of Terran Marines train in silence, preparing for deployment without fanfare. Railgun systems hum softly as they charge for the first time in years. Humanity has been silent not because it is weak, but because it knows patience is a far sharper blade than anger. The Council keeps laughing, louder with each passing day. Their broadcasts grow bolder. Their admirals boast of the exact hour their ships will arrive in Sol System. Their citizens celebrate the future conquest as if it is already written. But they do not see the truth lurking beneath their laughter. They do not see the Terran fleet waking up in the dark. They do not see the calculations, the strategy, the quiet fire behind human eyes. They mistake silence for submission. And that is their greatest mistake. At the end of the council session, as the speaker declares the countdown for war, the camera zooms in on his proud, glowing form. He raises his claw and shouts to the galaxy, "Humanity will bow!" The crowd roars in approval. But on the far edge of space, Admiral Ward stands in the cold shadows of the command deck, staring at the same broadcast. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't clench his fists. He just whispers, "No, you will." The council's laughter spreads through the stars like fire. But they don't know that a storm is already moving beneath their feet. A storm wrapped in silence. A storm with Terran steel at its core. Soon their laughter will end. And when it ends, it will end like a star going out. Sudden, cold, and absolute. The final warning came like thunder through the council's channels, broadcast across thousands of star systems as if it were already a victory speech. The speaker of the council stood tall in the center of the glowing chamber, his golden carapace reflecting the light from the giant banners above. Behind him, a massive holographic projection of Earth rotated slowly, like a target waiting to be struck. His voice rolled through the chamber with practiced arrogance, the kind of voice that believed it could never be challenged. This is the last summons to the Terran species. Comply with the Council, kneel to our law, and surrender your military command, or we will bring the Grand Armada to your system and remind you why the stars answer to us. His words were met with a roar of applause from the assembled delegates. They already saw this as a done deal. Alien media channels lit up like fire. Reporters screamed into their holocams, declaring the end of human defiance. Across alien colonies, massive billboards displayed images of Terran cities being crushed under the imagined might of the Council fleet. Merchants were already calculating what they would take from Earth. Admirals bragged about how quickly they would shatter Sol's defenses. The galaxy believed the story was written, that Earth would burn and humanity would crawl. But none of them saw what was happening in the silence of the Terran system. None of them understood that this warning wasn't intimidating Earth. It was sealing the Council's fate. Far beyond the noise of alien broadcasts, deep under layers of rock and reinforced steel, the Terran High Command gathered inside a vast circular war room carved into the heart of a black station orbiting Pluto's shadow. The room was dark, cold, and silent except for the hum of machinery and the faint glow of star maps. Massive holograms displayed the Council's fleet formations, their declared invasion routes, their weapon signatures, and their blind spots. Every piece of information that the Council considered secret had been quietly mapped and catalogued by humanity long before the first summons was ever sent. The alien threat was not a surprise. It was an event Terran Command had been expecting. Admiral Elias Ward stood at the center of the room with his hands behind his back, his gaze steady as the final Council transmission played again. The speaker's threats echoed across the chamber, but no one in the room flinched. Ward's face remained unreadable, but his eyes were sharp and cold. "This is the last warning." The alien voice boomed through the speakers. "Kneel or burn." When the transmission ended, there was a long, heavy silence. Then Ward spoke, not with anger, but with quiet certainty. "They think this is their war," he said. "But this war began the day they sent their first summons. We simply waited for them to finish talking." Around him, Terran officers exchanged cold, measured looks. They had been preparing for this moment for years, in the shadows, without fanfare, without grand speeches. They did not build their fleets to show them off. They built them for this moment. A woman on the far console leaned forward, tapping commands into her terminal. "Council fleet paths confirmed," she said. "Their main armada will enter Sol through the Cassini Gate. Their jump signatures are sloppy. They've grown too used to obedience." Ward nodded once. "Good. That makes this easier." Meanwhile, back in the Council chamber, Arrogance burned like a sun. Alien ambassadors shook hands and shared toasts, celebrating the coming invasion before it even began. Their admirals stood in the shadows of the chamber, heads held high. They had crushed dozens of rebellious systems before. None of them had lasted more than a single battle. Why should Earth be any different? They projected the timeline of the invasion. First contact in 3 standard days. Fleet bombardment within hours after arrival. Terran surrender before the week ended. The plan was so simple, so predictable, that they didn't even consider an alternative. But in hidden Terran shipyards orbiting Neptune, fleets slept like monsters under black sheets. Massive battleships larger than anything the Council believed Earth capable of building remained cloaked and cold, waiting for a single order. In the rings of Saturn, deep under layers of false asteroid rock, thousands of long-range railgun platforms hummed softly. Humanity had spent decades making sure no one saw them. The Council thought humans were building cities. They were building silence. Silence sharp enough to cut. Ward's voice echoed through the war room, low and steady. "They believe they are giving us an ultimatum," he said. "But we are the ones giving them a choice. And they don't even realize it." He turned to the communications officer. "No reply to their message. Nothing. Let their pride do the rest." The officer nodded without hesitation. Humanity's greatest weapon was not noise. It was silence. The kind that digs under the enemy's skin, the kind that makes them believe they're in control until it's too late. On alien worlds, as Council broadcasts thundered, Terran operatives hidden across colonies quietly uploaded new codes into listening satellites. Every step the Council took toward Sol was being mirrored, traced, and measured. On Earth, cities continued to move at their usual pace. Children went to school, workers traveled, farmers worked their fields. The ordinary world moved like nothing was happening, and yet beneath the surface, thousands of defense systems had already shifted from standby to active. In bunkers buried beneath the Rocky Mountains, railgun targeting systems aligned with the stars. Orbital defense platforms silently began cycling power. Across the Terran fleet, encrypted signals activated dormant protocols. At the same time, Council admirals posed for cameras. They let reporters film them in shining armor, their faces carved in smug pride. "The Terrans will be brought to heel," one said. "Their silence is nothing but fear. Their resistance will crumble." Their fleets assembled near the capital system, thousands of ships forming an iron storm. They believed they were unstoppable. They had never fought a war against someone who didn't scream before the fight. In the war room, Ward leaned over the holographic map and watched their formation light up like a careless target. "They are doing exactly what we wanted," he said softly. A younger officer frowned. "Sir, they think we'll beg before they arrive." Ward gave a thin smile. "Good. Let them think that. The louder they talk, the less they see." When the final countdown broadcast was released, the Council speaker's voice shook the galaxy. "The Terrans have been given their final chance. They have refused to kneel, and so the Grand Armada moves. In 3 days, the skies above their world will burn." The galaxy cheered. Alien citizens roared with approval. Fleet officers laughed. The speaker looked down on the image of Earth like a hunter looking at prey. No one considered that maybe, this time, the prey wasn't running. In that same moment, Terran High Command went silent. Not in fear. In readiness. Alarms didn't blare. No one shouted. Instead, quiet signals pulsed through encrypted networks. Shipyards shifted power. Railgun towers warmed. Engines thrummed like a giant heartbeat. Humanity did not move like prey. Humanity moved like something patient and ancient that had finally been disturbed. 3 days. That was the time the Council had given Earth. 3 days to kneel or burn. What they didn't understand was that in 3 days, they weren't going to witness a surrender. They were going to meet something they had spent centuries mocking. Something forged in silence, sharpened in shadows, and waiting for exactly this kind of arrogance. And in the dark of space, the Terran fleet waited with cold eyes. The Council thought this was an ultimatum. It was actually an invitation, and humanity was going to answer it their way. The night sky above the Council capital world had never looked so bright. Thousands of alien warships filled the void around their home star, their glowing engines burning like a second sun. The Grand Armada stretched as far as sensors could reach, an endless line of metal and arrogance. Every ship was polished and armed to the teeth, their hulls painted with the proud banners of the Council's many empires. Crowds gathered across cities and observation platforms, gazing upward at the Armada with cheers and celebration. Holoscreens broadcast the sight to billions across the galaxy. Reporters called it, "The night humanity will kneel." Children waved flags, soldiers beat their chests, and admirals boasted into cameras about how quickly they would conquer Sol. None of them noticed the slight dimming of the stars behind the fleet. None of them felt the quiet pressure creeping across the edges of their sky. The Speaker of the Council stood on a balcony overlooking the central square, his golden carapace gleaming under artificial light. Around him, delegates and military commanders crowded to bask in the power of their fleet. He raised his arms, his voice carried by 1,000 speakers. "This is what power looks like," he declared. "Let every world remember this night. Let the Terrans learn that the Council is law. No one defies us and survives." The plaza below erupted with roars. Holodrones zipped through the air, broadcasting his words across systems. He turned to the fleet admiral beside him, a hulking reptilian warrior with eyes like frozen glass. "Prepare to move," the speaker said confidently. "When we arrive, they will break." Far above, the Council fleet aligned into final formation, each squadron snapping into place with precision. Battle cruisers, dreadnoughts, carriers, and swarm ships formed a gleaming wall in the stars. The Armada was everything the Council believed themselves to be: massive, proud, unstoppable. Admirals walked through their bridges with smug satisfaction, laughing with their officers. Some of them opened wide broadcast channels, sending taunting messages into the void. "Humanity," one of them sneered, "you had your chance to kneel. Now we will take everything from you." Their words echoed through space. No reply came, not a whisper, and that silence, though they didn't realize it, was about to crush everything they thought they knew. Then it happened. One by one, the stars behind the Armada began to vanish. Not dim, not fade, disappear, as if something enormous had passed in front of them. Pilots on patrol squinted at their scanners, confused. They saw nothing but darkness, as if space itself had thickened behind the fleet. On planetary surfaces, people lifted their eyes, their cheers faltering as the night sky darkened. Broadcasters spoke faster, nervous, trying to keep the excitement alive. But the stars kept vanishing. The entire rear of the Council fleet was slowly being swallowed by something black. Then the first sensor ping came. It was soft, almost too quiet to hear. A single alert, then dozens, then thousands. Command decks across the Armada lit up like emergency flares. Unidentified contacts, massive, silent, closing fast. The alien admiral leaned over the console, his grin faltering. "What is that?" he barked. The officer at the sensor station stammered, I don't know, sir. They're not broadcasting. No transponders. No engine signatures. It's like they're shadows." The admiral slammed his claw on the console. "Put it on the main screen." And there it was, the shape. At first just a blur against the stars. Then lines. Sharp, black, endless. One ship, then 5, then 50, then hundreds. Massive Terran warships sliding out of the dark like predators rising from deep water. Their hulls absorbed the light around them. No banners, no colors, no signals. A fleet designed to be unseen until the moment it decided not to be. Across the Council world, panic spread like fire. Civilians looked up at the sky as the black shapes grew larger, eclipsing entire constellations. On military channels, voices overlapped in panic. "Unknown fleet in Sector 3. They're surrounding us. Where did they come from? Why didn't we detect them?" The speaker stepped closer to the balcony railing, his golden eyes wide for the first time. He could see the darkness with his own eyes now. Not the void of empty space, but something moving inside it. His admirals shouted into comms, demanding answers, but none came fast enough. The Terran fleet was not arriving from far away. It was already here. Above the Council capital world, black Terran dreadnoughts cut through space without a sound. Their surfaces shimmered faintly under starlight, like blades of obsidian. They didn't need to light their engines. They had been waiting, cloaked in the darkness, watching the alien fleet assemble in Arrogance. Now they were done waiting. Terran formation moved like one organism, sliding between the gaps in the Council's formation with terrifying precision. In seconds, their ships locked into position, forming a massive wall that stretched across the stars, blotting out entire systems. Every alien I lifted to the sky saw only black steel and cold light. The sky itself looked broken. On the flagship bridge, the Council fleet admiral shouted at his officers to activate shields, power weapons, prepare defenses. But their commands were messy, panicked, late. The Terran ships didn't fire a single shot. They didn't need to. Their presence alone changed everything. Thousands of railgun towers along their hulls unfolded slowly, silently, like the wings of some monstrous creature. Drone carriers released swarms that vanished into the darkness, invisible to alien sensors. Alien commanders screamed into their comms, trying to make sense of the sensor data. Nothing made sense. Every reading was off the charts. The size of the fleet, the heat signatures, the positioning. The Terrans weren't at a disadvantage. They had surrounded the entire Armada. The speaker stumbled back from the balcony, his voice breaking for the first time. How many are there? His aide, pale and trembling, whispered, "Too many." In the cities below, alien citizens began to panic as news broadcasts stuttered. Screens filled with black silhouettes of Terran ships. The once cheering crowds fell silent, their throats dry as they watched the fleet grow larger and larger, until it seemed as if the entire sky had turned black. A mother clutched her child. A merchant shut down his stall. Soldiers who had once shouted for war stood frozen under the weight of a presence they couldn't comprehend. Back in orbit, the Terran flagship drifted to the front of the formation, an enormous vessel shaped like a black dagger aimed at the Council's capital world. Its surface was smooth, unmarked, terrifying in its simplicity. No demands were made. No threats were spoken. Just silence. Every alien ship now faced a fleet that didn't come to negotiate. It came to end conversations. The alien admiral clenched his teeth and barked to open all Council channels. The speaker's voice cracked through the airwaves. "This is the Galactic Council. Identify yourselves." For a long moment, nothing answered. Then, a single human voice, cold and steady, filled every comm channel in the system. "You summoned us." That single line swept across every alien world like a blade. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. But it was final. A chill spread through the chamber, through every Council fleet officer listening. The speaker tried to steady himself, forcing a laugh that didn't sound real. "You think your ships can frighten us?" But even as he spoke, the shadow outside grew deeper. The Council's mighty fleet, the one they bragged about for months, was now surrounded like prey caught in the claws of a hunter. In that instant, the galaxy understood something it had forgotten. Silence is not always weakness. Sometimes silence means waiting, preparing, watching. And now the Terrans had arrived, not with words, but with a black wall of ships that swallowed the stars. The sky itself belonged to them. And for the first time in centuries, the Council felt something it had not felt in generations: fear. The moment the Terran fleet fully emerged from the shadows, the Council's false confidence cracked like glass under pressure. Alarms screamed across their armada as command decks scrambled to make sense of what they were seeing. Every Council ship's sensor array was flooded with readings that made no sense. Hundreds, then thousands of contacts appearing at once. Terran ships hung in the void like black blades, each one perfectly positioned. They didn't rush. They didn't fire. They didn't even move with the sloppy bravado of most war fleets. They hovered in absolute formation, every railgun turret locked, every fighter wing hidden like a blade behind a cloak. The alien admirals had spent months laughing at humanity's silence. Now they realized that silence had teeth. On the flagship bridge, the Council's fleet admiral shouted for a status update, but the officers couldn't keep their hands steady. "They're surrounding us," one whispered, voice breaking. "Sector 4, 6, and 9 are already blocked. Their flanking formation is perfect." Another voice shouted over the noise, "We can't get a clean read on their numbers. Our scanners can't keep up." The admiral slammed his claw on the console. "Estimate." The officer swallowed. "More than us. At least double." A cold chill ran through the room. The Council had assembled the largest armada in its history, and yet the Terran fleet had outnumbered them without a single public announcement. For years, they had been blind. For years, humans had been building in silence. Above the capital world, the Terran dreadnoughts continued to slide into position. The largest of them, its black hull swallowing every star around it, moved to the front. Its shape was simple, clean, terrifying, a warship built not to impress but to erase. Thousands of Terran railgun barrels shifted in unison, aligning on target points with surgical precision. Drone swarms drifted from their bays like black mist, spreading across the void like a tightening net. Every movement of the Terran fleet was calculated, rehearsed, flawless. It wasn't an army stumbling into war. It was a hunter closing the trap it had been setting for years. In the cities below, civilians who just hours ago were cheering for the Council's victory now stood frozen under a dark sky. The sun was blocked by the Terran fleet, turning noon into an unnatural twilight. Every screen that had once broadcast Council propaganda was now showing the same image: Terran warships eclipsing the stars. A child tugged at his mother's sleeve and whispered, "Are they going to shoot?" The mother didn't answer. No one did. The entire planet had fallen silent, like prey waiting to be judged. The Speaker of the Council stormed into the military command chamber, his golden armor glinting under red alert lights. "Fire on them," he barked. "Show them who we are." The fleet admiral turned sharply, his voice shaking despite his rank. "We can't just fire at them. We don't even have their full positions mapped. We'd be shooting blind," the Speaker snarled. "Then aim at their flagship." But even as he spoke, the realization settled over the room like ice. They didn't know which ship was the flagship. Every Terran vessel looked the same. No colors, no banners, no vulnerabilities. It was a wall of black iron staring down an empire. Finally, the panic broke. One of the younger alien commanders, desperate and shaking, shouted into the comms, "All ships, open fire. Don't let them." But his voice was cut off as senior officers screamed for discipline. The fleet erupted into noise, with captains yelling over one another, trying to decide whether to fight, flee, or negotiate. But the Terrans didn't yell. They didn't scramble. They waited motionless, with their railguns aimed. Every alien on the bridge could feel it. If humanity wanted to fire, they wouldn't need to speak first. Across the Armada, alien admirals forced their trembling crews to ready their weapons. Gigantic plasma cannons began to charge energy lances aimed toward the Terran wall. Thousands of torpedoes slid into launch tubes. This was supposed to be the Council's moment of strength. It was supposed to end in minutes with Earth in flames. Instead, they stood face to face with something older, colder, and far more prepared. A single voice echoed through every channel, the same voice that had broken their arrogance moments ago. "Calm, controlled, human, you summoned us. And now, we are here." That line didn't just echo through ships. It carved its way into the minds of everyone who heard it. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't laced with rage. It was the voice of someone who did not need to prove their power. It was the sound of a predator speaking to prey. The speaker stepped forward, slamming his clawed hands on the console. "This is the Council," he roared. "You will submit to us now or face destruction." There was a pause. Then came humanity's answer, cold and soft like steel sliding from a sheath. "You think we came to kneel?" The Terran flagship's railguns rotated as one. The alien fleets screamed for shields to rise. Across the Armada, thousands of energy barriers flickered to life, glowing blue and gold. The Council had always believed in their shields. They had built entire wars on the arrogance of their technology. But Terran commanders weren't aiming for their shields. They were aiming at the gaps, the pressure points, the hidden corners they had studied for decades. Humanity's silence hadn't been empty. It had been watching, calculating. And then the sky cracked. The Terran fleet fired not like an army, but like a single weapon. A wall of kinetic energy roared through the void, faster than light sensors could react. There was no warning, no flash, just instant, devastating impact. 1, 2, 10 alien ships shattered on contact, their hulls folding inward like paper crushed by invisible hands. Shields flickered and died as railgun slugs tore through them like they weren't even there. Entire squadrons vanished in seconds, their destruction silent but absolute. Panic erupted through the Council's channels. "We're hit. We're hit. Our shields aren't holding. Where are they firing from?" But there was no pattern to trace. Terran targeting systems didn't follow the logic of an alien fleet. They followed the logic of an execution. On the speaker's command deck, every display turned red. The Armada that had once stretched like a sea of light was breaking apart in less than a minute. Terran railguns fired again. Another wave. More Council ships exploded. Alien admirals screamed into their comms, demanding their forces regroup. but their formations were already shattered. The once proud wall of golden ships was a storm of burning metal, spinning wreckage, and silent screams. The speaker's confident grin from hours before was gone, replaced by the trembling realization of what they had called down upon themselves. Below, alien civilians watched as their fleets, the fleets that had terrified half the galaxy, crumbled like sand under a black tide. Their skies had gone dark, and now their hope was burning with it. The Terran fleet didn't speak again. They didn't taunt. They didn't demand. They simply fired with quiet, relentless precision, cutting down every sign of resistance. It wasn't a war. It was judgment. On the bridge of the Terran flagship, Admiral Ward stood unmoving, hands folded behind his back, watching the alien fleet break apart with clinical detachment. He didn't shout orders. His officers didn't scream. They executed their plan like clockwork. Every hit was calculated, every move precise. Years of silence had come down to this single moment, and humanity didn't waste it. The speaker stumbled back, his voice hoarse, his power slipping away with every broken ship. "This can't be happening," he whispered. But it was. The Council's might was being erased faster than they could comprehend. For the first time in its long history, the Galactic Council realized it had summoned something it could not control, something it could not scare. They had summoned humanity's silence, and found the storm waiting beneath it. The Council fleet was no longer a proud wall of shining steel. It was a field of burning wreckage scattered across the black sky. Hundreds of ships that had once flown in perfect formation now spun aimlessly, their glowing engines dimming, their shields shattered like fragile glass. Alien officers screamed through broken comm channels, their proud battle cries replaced by raw panic. Command bridges were on fire, airlocks vented atmosphere into the void, and entire divisions were falling apart before they ever got the chance to regroup. The fleet that had once terrified the galaxy now floated like prey caught in a trap. And above it all, the Terran fleet remained in perfect formation. Cold, silent, merciless. Every alien commander who had once mocked humanity now shouted desperate orders. "Reform the line," one screamed. "Return fire," another begged. But the chaos was too deep, their formations too broken. Terran slugs were still tearing through their ranks like thunderbolts, moving faster than their sensors could track. Railgun rounds didn't glow like plasma. They didn't roar with heat signatures. They were invisible death, hitting before any defense could react. A dreadnought on the left flank tried to swing around to protect the speaker's flagship, but before its engines could finish their turn, 3 tungsten slugs slammed into its midsection, punching through like knives through cloth. The ship folded inward, split into 2 burning halves, and vanished into a storm of debris. The Council's admiral slammed his claws on the console, screaming at his officers to fire everything. Energy lances, plasma cannons, fusion torpedoes, all of it launched at once in a chaotic storm. Beams of light filled the darkness as the Council fired every weapon it had at the Terran wall. But the Terran fleet didn't flinch. Their formations shifted like they were following a script written years ago. Dreadnoughts rotated, destroyers slid into perfect interception arcs, and interceptor drones formed kinetic shields, absorbing and dispersing the majority of the Council's desperate volley. What little firepower actually reached the Terran hulls barely scratched the black armor. The aliens had prepared for a war of noise. The humans had prepared for precision. And precision always wins. The speaker watched from the high bridge of his flagship, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts. His voice had carried arrogance hours ago. Now it carried only disbelief. "No, this isn't possible." His aides rushed around him, shouting incomplete sensor readings and casualty reports. But the truth was written across every display. Their fleet was dying. Not in hours. Not even in minutes. In seconds. Every strike from the Terran fleet ripped away another piece of the Empire's illusion. The Council had always believed their size alone made them untouchable. They never imagined someone would come to the battlefield with silence instead of fanfare. On the Terran flagship, the bridge was the opposite of the chaos. No shouting. No confusion. The crew moved like clockwork. Railgun crews rotated their batteries. Targeting teams fed live telemetry into fire control. The command officers didn't need to yell. Their movements were clean, measured, practiced. Admiral Ward stood at the center, hands behind his back, watching the Council fleet tear itself apart in real time. His voice was steady, almost quiet. Sector 7. Anchor fire. Without hesitation, an entire Terran flank turned as one. A second later, a volley of slugs tore through the Council's right wing, snapping their defense like a brittle bone. Council ships tried to retreat, but they were trapped. Terran ships had surrounded them before the first shot was fired. Every possible escape route was already locked down. Some alien captains attempted to turn their ships back toward the capital world for cover, but Terran interceptors were already waiting. The first of these retreating ships was hit by a single, precise slug that split its engines apart. The explosion scattered molten debris into other ships trying to flee. One slug, 3 kills. No mercy, no wasted movement. The aliens had built their empire on crushing weak opponents. But tonight they were the ones being crushed. On the surface of the Council capital world, civilians watched the sky with silent terror. The once blinding glow of the Grand Armada had dimmed to burning fragments falling through the atmosphere like fiery rain. Giant warships they had worshipped for generations were now broken shapes casting long shadows across the cities below. Every screen that once broadcast victory speeches now showed static, brief flashes of fire, and fragments of alien commanders begging for reinforcements that didn't exist. One soldier on the ground whispered, "This can't be happening." But his words were drowned by the deep, distant rumble of Terran kinetic strikes cutting through orbital platforms like paper. The speaker gripped the edge of the console so tightly his claws cracked. "Call the reserve fleet," he screamed. "Bring everything." His communications officer turned to him, face pale. "Sir, there is no reserve. This was everything." Those words hollowed the room. This was the Grand Armada, the full force of the Council, and it was being erased in a single night. The speaker staggered back, breath shaking. He had never imagined a war like this. He had imagined grand speeches, battles drawn out for weeks, humanity begging for mercy at the foot of the Council's power. Instead, their fleet hadn't even lasted an hour. Terran drones began sweeping through the wreckage, picking off any surviving Council vessels with surgical strikes. No theatrics, no broadcasting their victory to the galaxy. They didn't need to. The silence was the message. The Terran fleet didn't shout. It simply dismantled everything in its path until nothing remained that could challenge it. Admiral Ward watched the feed as alien formations disintegrated. His expression didn't change. He wasn't smiling. This wasn't triumph to him. This was inevitability. "Finish it," he said quietly. The firing sequences continued, methodical and unstoppable. A massive alien carrier tried to make a desperate charge toward the center of the Terran formation, its plasma cannons burning bright like a dying sun. But before it could get close, a single Terran dreadnought adjusted its aim. 3 tungsten slugs cut through the carrier's front armor like it wasn't even there. The ship's spine snapped, its reactors went critical, and the explosion lit up the entire sector like a false sunrise. That was the final blow. Whatever resistance remained in the Council fleet evaporated into pure chaos. Captains were screaming for retreats that would never happen. Officers abandoned their stations. Some ships fired blindly into the void, hitting their own allies in panic. One of the alien admirals opened a wideband channel, his voice shaking. "Cease fire! Cease fire! We surrender." But the Terrans didn't respond. They didn't need his words. The Admiral's flagship was hit seconds later, a slug tearing through its command tower like a knife through flesh. The Council's leadership on the battlefield vanished in one blinding strike. Down below, alien soldiers and civilians alike fell into silence. They finally understood what that human silence had meant. It wasn't cowardice. It was the calm before a storm they could never survive. The speaker stared at the tactical display as red dots. His ships vanished one after another until only scattered debris remained. "We were the strongest," he whispered. "We were the law." His voice cracked into a broken laugh. And they didn't even speak. No one answered him. His aides were either dead or running. The Council fleet no longer existed. The Terran fleet hadn't even been forced to reveal its full power. Above, in the black ocean of space, Terran ships floated in perfect formation, a silent wall of iron that had erased an empire in less than a night. And in that terrible quiet, the galaxy began to understand something it had forgotten long ago. You do not mock silence. You fear it, because when humanity answers, it doesn't shout. It erases. The sky above the Council capital world was no longer a sky. It was a tomb, where once there had been a proud armada glowing like 1,000 suns. Now there was only darkness. Darkness filled with the silent, black silhouettes of Terran warships. Wreckage from the Grand Armada drifted like ash in the void, the fires of broken engines flickering dimly before dying out completely. No music of victory played. No grand speeches echoed through space. The Council, the so-called rulers of the stars, stood beneath their own shattered banner, staring up at a sky they no longer controlled. On every screen, in every broadcast, the people of the galaxy watched a sight they could not believe. The invincible Council fleet was gone, crushed by a force that hadn't even needed to shout. Inside the Council's central command tower, the speaker staggered through smoke-filled corridors, his golden carapace smeared with soot and blood. The building itself shook under the distant thrum of Terran railguns repositioning in orbit. The air smelled of burned electronics and panic. His guards whispered nervously, their hands shaking as they escorted him toward the communications chamber. Every few meters, they passed officers slumped against walls, weeping, whispering the same words again and again. They're still up there. They're still here. The speaker had spent a lifetime standing above others, speaking with the voice of a king. Now he couldn't even stop his hands from trembling. Every time he looked up through a broken window, he saw the Black Fleet, unmoving, staring down like a god that didn't need to explain itself. The communications chamber was filled with frightened faces. Generals, admirals, delegates. Those who had once laughed the loudest were now silent. Screens around the room displayed the orbit above their world. Red dots, their fleet were gone. Only black Terran signatures remained. The speaker slammed his claws on the console and shouted, "Open a channel! Demand to speak with their commander." One of the officers looked at him with hollow eyes. "Sir, they're not answering." The speaker's breath caught in his throat. "What do you mean they're not answering? We've been hailing them for 30 minutes, the officer said quietly. They won't respond. That was the most terrifying part. The humans weren't even speaking. They had arrived, erased an empire's army, and now they simply hovered above, silent, as if daring the Council to say something worth their attention. The silence felt like a weight pressing down on everyone in the room. It was the silence of a predator who didn't need to roar to remind the prey that it was still there. Outside, alien civilians flooded the streets in quiet panic. Some screamed and ran, some prayed to whatever gods they believed in, and some simply stood frozen, staring at the black shapes in the sky. For centuries, their entire civilization had believed in the power of the Council, in the Grand Armada, in their untouchable dominion over the galaxy. But now the truth hung above them like a blade. Every person could see it with their own eyes. The Council was no longer the apex predator. They had summoned something greater. They had summoned humanity. On the bridge of the Terran flagship, the crew moved with the same eerie calm they had maintained since the battle began. There was no cheering, no celebration. The officers worked quietly, monitoring the last fading signatures of the alien fleet, ensuring no stragglers could regroup. Admiral Ward stood at the center of the bridge, his hands behind his back, his gaze fixed on the image of the Council capital world. His face was cold and still. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The silence of the Terran fleet was its own language, and the entire galaxy understood it. One of his officers approached and whispered, "Sir, the speaker has been hailing us for some time. Multiple attempts." Ward didn't turn his head. He stared at the planet below as if studying it, memorizing every weakness. "And what has he said?" "Nothing yet. just begging for a response. A quiet moment passed. Then Ward spoke, his voice low, steady, and colder than the void. Let him wait. On the surface, the speaker's voice grew hoarse as he screamed at his staff. Why won't they answer? He slammed his clawed hand on the console again, cracking the metal. One of his aides flinched but didn't look up. Maybe they don't need to, the aide whispered. The words sank into the room like a drop of poison. For the first time in the history of the Council, they were not the ones dictating terms. They were the ones waiting for judgment. The tension in the streets grew heavier with every passing minute. Sirens echoed across the capital, not from Terran bombardment. There was none, but from pure panic. Civilians crowded into bunkers, leaders screamed at each other in back rooms, and military officers clutched weapons they knew wouldn't make a difference. The Terran fleet remained still, casting its shadow over the entire planet like a hand around a throat that hadn't yet squeezed. No one knew what they were waiting for. That was the terror. The Council had always expected loud threats, ultimatums, shows of force they could answer with their own noise. But humans didn't play their game. Humans answered their summons with silence. And silence is far more terrifying than a threat. On the Terran flagship, Admiral Ward finally raised his hand, and the bridge fell completely still. The comm officer turned toward him, waiting for his order. Ward's voice carried the weight of the entire fleet. Open the channel. A second later, the speaker's trembling voice filled the bridge. This is the Council speaker, he said, his tone thin and desperate. We request a ceasefire. We are willing to. But Ward cut him off before he could finish. His reply was calm, almost emotionless. We have not fired in 30 minutes. The only thing burning is your arrogance. The speaker froze, breathless. That single sentence hit harder than a bombardment. You think you can, he started, but Ward spoke over him again. You summoned us. And now we've come. We did not come to talk. We came to remind you of something you forgot. On every Council channel, across every world, Terran transmissions cut through the air like a blade. Billions heard that cold voice. You believed silence meant weakness. You thought we would kneel. But silence is what comes before the storm. And now, the storm has passed. Look above you. Look at what's left. The speaker's throat tightened as he stared at the tactical display. There was nothing left to look at but the black wall of Terran ships. Ward's voice lowered, quieter but heavier. The next time you send a summons to Earth, remember what happened here. Remember what silence brought you. The line went dead. No negotiation. No treaty. Just judgment delivered like a whisper. In the streets, civilians fell to their knees, not because they were told to, but because they understood. Empires had fallen before, but none had ever been crushed in such terrifying silence. The Terran fleet hadn't come to demand territory or bow to the Council. They had come to make a statement the galaxy would never forget. As the minutes passed, the Terran ships slowly began to turn. No banners, no speeches, no victories declared. Just the soundless, synchronized movement of giants returning to the dark. The speaker stood frozen, watching the Black Fleet begin to vanish into the void like it had never existed, leaving behind a broken empire and a terrified galaxy. The only sound left in the command chamber was his shaking breath. Above the world, the stars began to reappear one by one as the Terran ships moved out of orbit. But no one who lived through that night would ever see those stars the same way again. From that day forward, every world would remember that the humans had not answered with words. They had answered with silence, with power, with a fleet that turned gods into prey. And the Council would never be the same again. The Terran fleet drifted away from the Council capital like a black tide retreating from the shore, leaving behind nothing but silence, smoke, and fear. One by one, their warships vanished into the deep void, their engines cold, their movements as precise as their strike had been. No cheering, no gloating, no celebration. They didn't stay to watch the Council beg. They didn't need to. Their message was already written in the stars, carved into the memory of every soul who had seen the black wall of ships eclipse the sky. In a single night, Without a single negotiation or warning, humanity had reduced the galaxy's most powerful empire to trembling silence. On the surface, the speaker stood in the shattered command chamber, staring at the tactical display that now showed nothing but empty orbit. The icons that once represented the Council's Grand Armada had been erased, completely. His reflection in the cracked glass looked like a ghost. His golden carapace, once polished and bright, was smeared with smoke and ash. His voice was gone. His throat ached from shouting into a void that never shouted back. His aides stood behind him, heads bowed, their confidence dissolved into terror. For the first time in generations, the Council, so used to being obeyed, feared, worshipped, was now the one left waiting in the dark. Across the galaxy, alien worlds stared at their broadcast feeds in stunned silence. Billions of civilians, soldiers, merchants, and rulers had watched the Council call out to humanity with mockery and arrogance. They had laughed when Earth stayed silent. They had cheered when the Armada gathered, believing the war would be over in hours. But they did not laugh now. Now they whispered, and they whispered about the black fleet that had swallowed the sky. The greatest armada in history had lasted less than a night. A fleet that was supposed to crush Earth was instead annihilated without humanity losing a single ship. Entire civilizations now looked to the stars differently. The word Terran, carrying a new weight, a quiet terror no weapon could match. In the council chamber, the delegates sat in shock. These were the same beings who had laughed the loudest at humanity's silence. Now they couldn't even meet each other's eyes. The banners of their empire hung limply from the ceiling, their colors meaning nothing. One delegate broke the quiet with a whisper. "We've awakened something we can't control." Another muttered, "We thought they were weak." No one dared to finish the sentence. The speaker slowly turned away from the empty display, his steps heavy, his voice low and hoarse. "The galaxy will never see us the same way again." Above the dead battlefield, debris still floated like the bones of something that once believed itself immortal. Fires flickered out slowly in the vacuum, dying like the last embers of a fire that had burned too brightly for too long. Drone feeds from surviving orbital stations showed Terran ships disappearing into the darkness, like predators slipping back into the forest after the hunt. Their silence was almost worse than the attack. If they had demanded surrender or tribute or land, the Council might have found a way to rebuild its pride. But they had demanded nothing. They had said almost nothing. Humanity had come, struck, and left, and that meant they could return whenever they wanted. On distant worlds, alien rulers gathered in secret rooms. They replayed the footage over and over. The stars fading, the black fleet surrounding the Council, the voice that said only, "You summoned us." They saw how quickly the Council fell, and they understood that this was not just a defeat. It was a rewriting of power. Empires that once bowed to the Council began to whisper about new alliances, new fears. Some swore to never cross Earth's path. Some began to build quietly, praying they could match what they had seen. But deep down, they all knew the truth. Humanity had moved beyond fear. Humanity had become the thing to fear. The speaker walked through the ruined hall of the Council, past broken consoles and shattered pride. The corridors that once echoed with arrogance now carried only the sound of his footsteps. He reached the outer balcony and looked up at the stars. They were back, clear and bright, but they no longer felt like his sky. He whispered to himself, "They didn't even ask for anything." That was what haunted him the most. Humanity hadn't taken territory. They hadn't enslaved anyone. They had simply shown what happened when their patience ended. That kind of power wasn't about conquering land. It was about conquering fear. Far away, in the deep black between stars, the Terran fleet reformed its lines. Inside the flagship, Admiral Ward stood on the bridge, silent as ever. Around him, officers worked with cold precision, bringing the fleet back into dark space formation. There were no shouts of victory, no songs, no war speeches. Humanity didn't need them. The battle had been decided long before it began. Ward's second-in-command approached him quietly. "Sir, the Council hasn't followed us. Their fleet is gone. Their capital is in panic." We've made our point. Ward nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the endless void ahead. Good. Then we're done here. Should we issue further demands? She asked. Ward turned his gaze toward the darkness, his voice quiet but firm. No. They'll remember without us saying another word. That was the power of silence. It didn't need permission to linger. It sank into the bones of those who heard it and stayed there, whispering even when the ships were gone. Back on the Council capital world, cities remained frozen in a state between fear and disbelief. People whispered to each other in the streets, their faces pale, their eyes locked on the stars. Children asked their parents why the sky had gone dark. No one had an answer. Soldiers lowered their weapons, not out of orders but out of the realization that nothing they held could stop what they had seen. High above, broken stations drifted like the remnants of a dream. The entire galaxy had watched the apex predator of centuries bow to something it didn't even understand. The speaker returned to the council chamber, where dozens of frightened delegates waited for him to tell them what to do. His steps echoed like hammers on stone. He climbed the central platform slowly, feeling every inch of the weight pressing down on him. He looked around at the faces that had once been filled with arrogance and laughter. Now they stared at him with hollow fear, desperate for a plan. But there was nothing left to plan. The council's authority had been burned away in the dark, erased without mercy. He gripped the railing and whispered, "They didn't destroy us because they wanted to. They destroyed us because we called them." And with those words, the chamber fell into a silence heavier than any weapon. Across the stars, the story spread like a fire no one could put out. The Terran fleet had answered a summons no one thought they would. They had stood before the Council's greatest army and erased it without breaking formation. And then they had disappeared back into the void, leaving nothing but fear and a single truth that would haunt the galaxy for generations. Earth had no interest in playing the Council's game. But if the galaxy called for them again, they would come. In the depths of space, as the Terran fleet slipped into jump formation, Ward gave his final order. Fade into the dark. Engines whispered to life. One by one, the massive black warships vanished, leaving no trace but the echo of their presence. The stars returned to their usual silence, but the galaxy would never be the same again. The Council had once thought silence was weakness. Now they would spend centuries fearing the day that silence returned.